However, it is much more effective at submarine detection on the surface than sonar or ASDIC was at detecting German submarines when they were under the water. And we don't have to get into the physics of this to explain the distinctions. What matters is that radar is the most useful electronic submarine countermeasure. And radar is a brand new technology in the Second World War, developed in the late 1930s. And once it's carried on board escort vessels, they're able to find German submarines on the surface in the dark before the submarines can launch an attack against the convoy. Crucially important. Another technological development is the increased introduction of gyroscopic compasses on board Allied escort vessels. And again, I'm not going to get into the physics which explain why gyroscopic compasses are useful, but the bottom line is that they were more effective direction finding devices for naval applications, and in order to track submarines which had been detected by radar, you had to be able to navigate properly. Right? If you knew which way the submarine was headed and you couldn't navigate properly, you couldn't chase it away. But the introduction of gyroscopic compasses improves the ability of naval escorts and submarine hunting teams to navigate more precisely. A third and really significant piece of technology which becomes more and more available on board Allied escort ships in 1943 is HFDF, high frequency direction finding equipment, also known as HFDUF. And again, I won't get into a detailed technical explanation, but basically what HFDUF achieved was to turn the advantage of the wolf packs against the Germans. How did it do this? Remember that in order for the wolf pack tactic to work, the Germans have to send lots of radio signals. Right? The first submarine to detect the convoy has to send a signal, and then German naval headquarters has to send radio signals to a bunch of other submarines. But what matters is that first signal. Because what HFDF does is give the Allied escorts the ability to detect when a submarine sends a radio message. It doesn't tell the escort the contents of that message, that's not important. But what it does tell us is what direction the submarine is in relative to the convoy when it sends the message. And it also tells how far away the submarine is. So if you're escorting a convoy and you have HFDF equipment on your ships, and you detect that a German submarine has sent a radio transmission, and you know that it's 50 miles away in a southwesterly direction, you just don't go that way. Avoid it altogether. Avoid it altogether. And as a consequence, submarines find it harder and harder into 1943 to find targets and engage them with a chance of success, right, because of these new technological countermeasures. A few other key technologies that help to tip the balance are aircraft carriers and VLR air cover, very long range air cover. At this stage of the war, or throughout 1942, the most dangerous part of the Atlantic for the escort vessels was the mid-Atlantic, because they had in that space no air cover coming either from North America or Iceland or the UK. And air cover was one of the best preventative measures against submarine attack, because aircraft could spot surface submarines in the daytime much more quickly than anybody on board the convoy or the convoy escort could. And aircraft could also attack submarines at the surface with bombs and torpedoes and cannon fire. But up until 1943, there was a big hole in the middle of the Atlantic where air cover couldn't reach, and therefore the convoys had to sail without it. But by adding escort aircraft carriers to the convoys, there was always air cover available, and by reallocating long-range bomber aircraft to VLR air cover duty, operating from coastal bases, there was a better chance of having air cover right across the middle of the Atlantic. And this means that as of sort of the second half of 1943, the German U-boats begin to suffer prohibitively heavy losses. Between May and October alone, the Germans lost 135 submarines. And you can see these sinkings are plotted all over the map by the, there's a little icon there of a submarine going under the water. That's a submarine sinking. So you have lots of submarine sinkings in 1943. And while the submarine threat never goes away for the rest of the war, when we look at all the countermeasures that the Allies now have, proper radar sets, gyroscopic compasses, HFDF, proper air cover, more skilled escort crews, the submarines no longer present a palpable strategic threat to the Allied war effort. So as in 1918, the German submarine strategy failed. Although the sort of technological cat and mouse game during 1941 to 1943 was much more complex than it had been in the First World War, where there was no such thing as radar, where there was no such thing as HFDF, and where sonar came along too late to really have a decisive impact. So yes, the Allies had convoys. The Germans overwhelmed the convoys with wolf packs, and the Allies overwhelmed the wolf packs with these various other technological developments. So in conclusion then, Germany went to war in 1939 without any sort of clearly defined naval strategy, and with a navy that wasn't yet prepared in terms of overall numbers of vessels to fight another global war. So although the Germans should have learned a great deal from their First World War experience, they seem not to have implemented those lessons to greatest effect during the Second World War. On the other hand, the Allied navies nearly lost control of the Atlantic shipping lanes in 1942 and 1943. Why was this? Well, because they had also neglected anti-submarine warfare capabilities during the interwar period, and they had not put sufficient technology behind the anti-submarine effort until relatively late in the game in 1943. And the reason for this was because the Allies only had so much capacity to manufacture cutting-edge radar and long-range aircraft and high-frequency direction finders, and these expensive pieces of high-tech equipment were needed for other applications, so they were slow to arrive in the naval theater. So both sides had advantages and disadvantages and made good judgments and bad judgments in the grand scheme of the campaign. But what the struggle over the war in the Atlantic in both wars really shows us is that, contrary to popular mythology, the Allies did not enjoy endless abundance of human and material warfighting resources. That they had limited resources to bring to their campaigns, and they had to make difficult decisions on how these would be allocated. And those decisions came with a real price as far as the transatlantic convoys were concerned, particularly in the Second World War. We'll leave it there for now. Thank you.